Ismail Abdulsalam, beatsboxingmayhem.com. I'm here with a very special guest. This man's one of the people that actually put me in the game as a writer, so I'm very happy to be here. We're talking about his first project as an editor. This is my man, Odell Hall, and we are talking about his new book called The Plague of Placidius. So, Odell, appreciate you making time, and thank you for coming to talk about this wonderful project.
Well, thanks for having me, man. It's good to be here, man. It's good to see you, watch your growth from afar, and I'm very happy and very proud of the progress that you have made. So thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem, no problem. So for those who are wondering, you see my background, that's the man that we're talking about. His name is actually Prince Ato, the Porcupine Man. He is the actual superhero, the African superhero of the work that we're talking about. You being the editor, I kind of wanted to start there. For people who might go on Amazon or Goodreads, they're going to see your name as kind of like the first time editor, but you had the journey to get to this point, just like Jay-Z says, your first
Yeah.
album takes your whole life to get here. So just talk about your journey to getting to this point to editing this project.
Well, I started out actually at allhiphop.com. Um, I I remember the day, right? It was September 11th, 2002, and I was on this back when the internet first, when we first regularly had internet, and I was looking for Tupac lyrics, and I Googled it, or at that time it was probably Mozilla, Mozilla did, and
Yeah.
Netscape did, or something like that. And I ended up on the site, and so I joined the community, and I was on there for a while, and I saw some things that I thought could be improved, and I reached out to the owners, Greg and Chuck, and a relationship was formed, and ultimately I ended up being manager editor. Um, it's been a long time. Well, that was 2002, and here we are in 2023. So that's 21 years of my life. I left all hip hop in 2009 and started my own engine, Planet Ill, and that is still ongoing. And so you you make the transition from working for somebody else to having your own shop, and I'm sure you can identify with those aches and pains and growth. And you get used to working with different people and different styles. Some people are professional writers, some people are not so professional and are trying to break in. So you kind of get the ability to bring out the best in each person. Um, it's it's difficult, right? The first time you hit somebody with that red pen and that ink, and they're like, because it's art, right? It's
Right.
it's creation. It's about the closest thing you can get to God is to create something that didn't exist, and they have a personal investment in it. They have, they feel a way about it, and you're about to come in and go, nah, not this, but this, not this, but this, and for those who can take it, they are willing to improve. You can see their growth. And for those who are not, this may not be the place for them. But uh, I've grown, and have said I've written for a few places. I've written for Ebony magazine. We had a feature on Nas and his money moves, and Marsai Martin, and we've written in uh, different books and essays. So I've been on both sides of it, being edited and being an editor. Now, for this particular book, uh, I went to school with the author, and he had an idea. And so he knew my background and he knew my history, and he showed me the book. And as I went through it, he's got a great imagination, but he's an unpolished writer. And so I went through and I added some things for the sake of story and plot. I fleshed out the characters and made them, human or relatable. I gave them their look and there's, certain powers, and we moved on famously from there. So it was a painstaking process. I mean, I used to, as you know, we used to crank out a lot of work in a particular week, but sitting down with something and chiseling it into, out of stone is a totally different experience. This book is 50,000 or so words.
Right.
And, you know, I always tell everyone that all stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's like sales. You tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. And characters have different arcs, and you want to, you know, when you come into a situation where you're world building and you're creating something from nothing, and now it's like, okay, well, does this make sense? Well, 20,000 words later, you're like, oh, wait a minute, this conflicts with something 20,000 words back. So now I got to go back and figure out, oh, what was this character's name? Oh, yikes. you know, and editing was probably harder than writing in terms of getting everything to jibe and everything to make sense and to get the motion of the story. And you have your plot twists, and you don't want to make it. So there's only 6 stories, right?
Mhm.
And every story we have supposedly is a derivation of those 6. So it's gonna be familiar, I suppose, but you don't want it to be derivative. So you got to find a way to be both original and engaging, and to connect the story with people's lives so they can see, oh man, this is a world I want to be a part of. I want to see what happens to this guy. And I'm a comic book lover. I learned to read on Simonson's store from Marvel. So to develop your own mythology in itself is a fantastic exercise and enterprise. And now we're in the world of IP where, okay, you wrote the story and now you're going to do a graphic novel, or you do a cartoon, or you're coming out with toys. So you have to respect the characters as living, breathing things, even though they're imaginary, because people will connect to them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when you're talking about world building, one of the things that stood out to me initially reading it in the beginning, when you're talking about the kingdom of Zuka, the whole idea of being careful about what you're building, because we know there's always going to be outside sources that want to come in and tear it down. We see that just in reality in our history, Tulsa, Roswell,
Right.
places like that. So I like how that was kind of infused from the beginning, and also that line between uh, building on what your ancestors put, but also being willing to move forward and modernize. So you
Right.
put a lot into it in building this world, and you said from the jump, the kind of the aim is to tell the stories of that diaspora. Would it be accurate to call the Porcupine Man almost kind of like a Pan-Africanist type of superhero? Because it really stood out to me his willingness to kind of go to other lands. We don't see that all the time with superheroes, especially in the beginning.
Right. So black people are in an interesting place right now. And you have kind of internet, I want to say agitators,
Yeah.
because when you're in real life, I don't know that the differences between us are so virulent.
Mhm.
I don't think they're so caustic, but you have people who are profiting off division. So, it looks kind of funky. You got ADOS and FBA and people from Caribbean and people from Africa, and this, especially on Twitter, it gets very crazy. But what we wanted to do is tell the stories of us all. We got more IP on the way, which will bounce from different places and tell our story from different perspectives. Some of them are related to the Porcupine Man, and some are not. Some of them are real life stories. Some of them are, different universes. So it was important to us to get something that uh, kind of bridge that gap, right? Also, you don't want to play Black Panther Jr., right? Yeah, because you know, yeah, he's royalty, right? He's African royalties, but that's kind of where the symbolism, the similarities stop. This guy's, T'Challa is paranoid, man. He's like a crazier, stronger, faster, richer Batman. But
Mhm.
this guy is a child, and he's growing up, and he's realizing his destiny, and he's trying to figure out the world. He doesn't know. So there's a little bit of Spider-Man in him. There's a little bit of Shazam in him where, you know, he may be in over his head no matter how powerful he is, because he's a child. Uh a young man as the story progresses, but he is not worldly. no matter what kind of training his parents have given him, or wherever he encounters that training, he has not lived in the world to be sophisticated enough to work some of these things out on his own, and he needs help. And some things that may not fool an OG, kind of give him some trouble. So it's good to see that youthful energy. It's good to see the respect for, his ancestors, but also it's good to see his family intact, right? Because in a lot of these stories, there's some kind of tragedy. Batman's an orphan. Spider-Man's an orphan taken in by his grandfather. Shazam is a kid. He's a child. He's a baby. And where's the parents? So the fact that this guy has his family intact, and we'll see more of their adventures as we move forward in the IP, I think makes it a little bit different because he's got things he has to work around. You know, you're somebody like Thor, you got dad issues, but yeah, you're Thor. Like you can get away from Asgard.
Mhm.
This kid, you know, Ato doesn't really get away from his parents, such as that he has the capacity to learn from them, and he has to be accountable for not only his secret identity, but also his responsibilities to both himself and to his parents and to the kingdom. And he's got sisters. You know, we don't usually have women play roles in these stories where they're not, ancillary, or where they actually matter to the movement of the story. And we tried to, one, introduce his three sisters, but also set them up in the way that we identify them so that they can have their own adventures. And they don't have to be superhero adventures. They can be the adventures of modern women living in traditional times. So, you know,
That's a very good point too, because the influence of Greek tragedy on comic books, like you said, there's always some type of tragedy we see with Batman, so Uncle
right.
Ben with Spider-Man. I think African mythology and Black American history gives a whole new gateway to exploring it without having to use kind of those tropes that we've seen before. So that's definitely something that I noticed. Um, One other thing, as far as when you're talking about mythology, I noticed something about, not to give all the details away, there is kind of a burning flower symbol, so to speak, that's important in the story
Yeah,
that symbolizes something. And just looking at kind of Christian history, I'm thinking, oh, burning, burning bush,
you're right.
destiny, things like that. I was wondering if that was deliberately done just to kind of give people who might be new to this type of story something that they might be kind of familiar with that they can kind of latch onto as progressing in the story.
Right. It's a kind of anchor, right? You so somewhere in the origin of one of the characters, there's something that sounds very similar in terms of biblical nature. We didn't want to latch on to, the principles of God himself. I personally don't like, DC does that sometimes with gods in the comics. I'm not really with that, but we call it the maker. And
Mhm.
you know someone escaped the sight of the all-seeing. And that's an interesting thing to say. Well, if it's all seeing, how did he escape? Well, we show you how. But yeah, the burning bush is just a kind of anchor of familiarity where you understand the principle of it. It's not that, but it's something familiar that you can latch on. Okay, I see where this is going, or I see what this is, and move over. Now we actually personified it and we did some other things to it so that it's not, again, derivative, but it will give you a sense of safety in terms of imagination. Like, okay, I'm trying to grasp this concept. Oh, okay, I know what that is. And we move forward like that. I'm glad you caught that.
Right, right. And for those looking in the background, as far as Prince Otto, he has a lot of different powers. Normally most superheroes kind of have, one or two kind of things that they do really well, and that's kind of it. But we're talking with this man or this, kid, he has supernatural powers. We're talking about over a dozen. So on one hand, you might say, okay, well, how can this guy get beaten or what is his weakness? And like you mentioned, really the weakness is inexperience, being young, trying to learn how to navigate in the real world. And I feel like that made things more challenging, I'm sure, for you as an editor, because that's a whole lot more difficult to build that type of weakness than just say, here's kryptonite for Superman. That's what can take him out. So talk
Right.
a bit about just building all of that and still being able to have vulnerability with your superhero. I know that had to be very challenging.
Yes and no, right? Because you want to give a sense that he is mighty indeed, but you want to put him in danger because a hero is only as good as the danger he can overcome. So even the big bad in the story is not the biggest bad. We know where he comes from and we know what the source of his power is. And it's greater than what we've seen. So we've got wars in this book and we've got ancient things that happen. And this guy has, you know, this guy spat at the angel of death. So the villain is not somebody to be trifled with. And a lot of times let's take Superman, right? On Earth, there's really nothing that can do anything to him. And he's always hanging around with Batman. There's really no reason for him to hang around with Batman because he's already super smart anyway, and he
Mhm.
can't be hurt. And even with kryptonite and magic, really, Superman can do whatever you want him to do. You take somebody like Thor, you can put Thor in danger because Thor has a different mythology. He's got gods and monsters and dragons and things that are perpetually dangerous throughout centuries. So you can take Thor off Earth and put him someplace where he can be in danger, even though there's a whole bunch of things he can do with him without the hammer. So you want to avoid plot, introduce stupidity, right? Where, you know, somebody gets beat up by a loophole or something like that. No, you want these people to be genuinely endangered so that there's some kind of triumph, there's a payoff. Like, oh my God, is it going to happen? What's going on here? I know he's new. I know it's his book, so theoretically he's got to win. But am I feeling that throughout, or am I like challenged to consider that? Wow, this guy's really facing something that he may not be able to overcome. And there is death in the book. There is tragedy in the book. Well, I wouldn't say tragedy, but there is loss in the book.
Mhm.
And it's not the kind that, my mom died and I got to come back and I'm avenging somebody. But it's the kind to know that when these conflicts happen, there's real consequences to it. I know we watch superhero movies and these guys are throwing around tanks and throwing around buildings. Marvel came up with a company that cleans that stuff up. And
Yeah.
that was the story. But people are in danger when people with these kind of abilities are facing off against each other. He's got to worry about that too.
Mhm.
And then when we get into the supernatural, what kinds of monsters are he facing? Does he understand them? Does he have the capacity to reason how to defeat them? Because it's not all cops and robbers. I remember the old Max Fleischer Superman stories where Superman's fighting bank robbers. Like,
Right.
come on.
Mhm.
What's supposed to happen here? But we try to put him in enough danger that he has to reason his way out of. And we go a long way towards explaining the backstory behind some of these danger. Like there are some vampire assassins in the book where we give a story behind how truly dangerous they are and what they're about. And that might become a separate IP all of its own because I had a idea for something that makes them different from other vampires, particularly from an African perspective. So we'll see how that goes, man. I'm working on that book now. So
I love horror, so that's right up my alley. And I definitely want to say also what you mentioned about how these things affect regular people. In the story, we get commentary from Uber drivers, just everyday people who are in danger because of these events. And like you said, there is some tragedy. Not everybody can make it when things like this are happening and battles like this are happening. I think that sometimes is lost when you get some of those bigger epics, like you said, from Marvel and things like that. So I'm glad that you guys were able to touch on that this has happened in real time, in real city, New York and in Ghana and places like that. And there are, consequences for open warfare.
Right.
Yeah.
And we try to keep it physically reasonable, right? Because there's a scene where he has to stop a train. And originally, the scene was him meeting the train head on. And then you got to realize that physically, if he does that, everybody on the train will shift forward and be splattered. So
Mhm.
we figured a way out around that. Even though it's fantasy, right? You want to have some grounding in reality. I believe in suspension of disbelief, but not to the extent where you just can't believe.
Right.
I think there should be some boundaries towards suspension of disbelief. And I think one of the reasons that, let's say, a Marvel gets more relatable than a DC is because they always try to explain why these people have these powers. Like it's not always just magic. Like, yo, he got bit by a radioactive spider. Oh, he got caught in a gamma bomb blast. Oh, he's got the super soldier. Like there's some reason why these people have it. It's not like, oh, hey, this guy's lucky. He's a lucky rich guy. Whatever. And so also what we want to work on is the movement of heroes from rich people to everyday people, right? And not like Spider-Man where he's fighting for rent money and stuff like that. We're not going to be poverty pimping, but you know, I think it's time to stop rooting for rich guys. Yeah. You look at the Avengers, like Thor's the prince of an otherworldly country. Tony Stark's a billionaire industrialist. Batman, yeah, his mom died, but he's got a few $1 billion. Stop fighting crime and put a job program in Gotham. Who knows? But we want to get a fully fleshed out view of humanity and what happens when ordinary people get put into extraordinary situations.
Got it. And that was actually going to be my next question. I feel like, superhero movies are here to stay, but Endgame was kind of like the peak. Just the build up and everything that they did a decade before. It's like almost perfect. So you
Right.
can't replicate that, and it's kind of leaving an open space. It's like, where's kind of the next focus going to be? And you kind of just nailed it where it should be going forward. I'm very glad that you said that.
Thanks, man. We appreciate that because you know what, you want people to be able to see them, especially black children. You want them to be able to see themselves in these characters because you know I don't in my home we have black books and stuff like that. We don't my parents didn't raise me to fear that kind of stuff, but you want the images of power, you want the images of grandeur, you want the expansive view of what your children can be to look like them.
Mhm.
And that's not always the case in modern media. So it's not obtuse, right? It's not written in some kind of code where only black people can understand it. These stories are universal. It just so happens that the face of them is a little browner than usual. So yeah.
Got it. Got it. Let's talk about the villain. You talked about that before. Like there's kind of progression, almost kind of like a Star Wars thing where you got the two. You got one that's in the power and one that's a little bit more in the forefront, but you still got to work to get into him, kind of like Vader Palpatine situation going
Right.
on. But talk about how you went about creating that conflict. Because there's one train of thought where you see in a lot of movies where the hero meets the villain almost immediately and kind of realizes I'm not strong enough yet and gets beat up. And then they got to work to that second battle where they get their strength up. Didn't really do that here. So just kind of talk about the process you went through getting to Placidius and how you wanted to work that.
So we had the villain. He didn't have a name yet, but what we wanted to do was make sure that this guy had some heft. And so he's been around for thousands of years. And we gave him a kind of realistic origin where this guy he was a warlord. We've got tons of those. Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan, Farrakhan. We got a whole bunch of,
Mhm.
people who are sacking cities and doing those sort of things. And it so happened that this guy caught a big L, you know,
Mhm.
and, you know, while most people faced with death would be willing to go, this guy was unwilling to go. And when they came for him, he said, "Oh no." And the guy he spat at was like, "It's a lot of moxie for somebody who's bleeding out." You know? And so we took it from there. Not quite like Unicron and Galvatron, but but just something that we could build on and say, you know what, that kind of rage and that kind of animus can be focused toward some sort of singularity. And so we built upon that. And then, well, okay, if this guy's got all these powers, right, what could put him in danger? And at that point, we're like, hmm, woolly mammoths.
Right.
So in the back of the book, we kind of have pictures of what some of these things look like. Um, as we flesh out the IP, we'll have a view of what some of the other things in the book look like as well. But we have his family, we have the villain, uh, and I got to go back to the site and build the site up. I've been so busy book pushing and finishing it up that the side is not finished. I have to finish the map because we're in the middle of actually building out what this place looks like
Mm.
geographically. So there is going to be some immersion in it that people can look at and go, "Oh wow, this is like a real place." And
Right.
again, this is not Wakanda. This is not no technologically advanced stuff. This is a real village. Now, economically, they're a bit different. You know, they are hiding some things, but you know, they're a member of the UN. There's a trade council. There's like real things that go on in this place that go on in the real world. It's not like they're hidden in the shadows of Africa and nobody's heard about them. So we wanted to get as far away from that kind of thing as we could, because one, you don't want to get sued, but two, you want to tell an original story.
Right.
Um, Especially, when we started this, uh, Black Panther 2 had not really focused its story. We didn't know whether he was going to be replaced or back or anything like that. But we just wanted to distinguish the character. So the way we built Placidius was just, he's not going to be this guy's ongoing foe. We want to continuously step up the danger that this guy's in. But for the first time out, he is a real danger to Prince Ato. And so we had to we had to really, really give him a story that'll make him somebody that you knew could could really wreck this guy. So
Got you. And as far as mentioning originality, the first thing that stuck me is just his name, Porcupine Man. A lot of people, when you look at animals and things that you're going to take, this animal has always been overlooked. But if you've looked at the damage that porcupines have done to other animals, particularly dogs, you can go on Facebook and see that a dog that tries to bite a porcupine, how their face looks after it. So it's a very, dangerous animal and knows how to protect itself. So just talk a little bit about selecting that actual animal and building powers around it.
well, the thing about a porcupine is that its powers are defensive. You don't really get into, if you leave a porcupine alone, you're fine. And generally speaking, when you attack the porcupine, that's when you face the quills. So building upon that, we know that this is some kid out in the world. He's got friends. He's not looking for trouble. This is not Batman combing through crime alley looking for people to beat up. It's not Daredevil on a rooftop looking for muggers. This is just some kid in school with his friends, and he's found this thing. So he has to be trained. And as his powers become more expansive, we try to keep them animal based just so that there's some kind of functionality to them. So he's got the power of the black mamba. He's got, he's got the power of the American buffalo. He's got different things that how they work, and we explain how they work so that maybe if you're fast enough, you say, "Oh man, if this comes out, maybe he can do this, or maybe he can do that." And sometimes it'll go the way you think, and sometimes it won't. But at least we have a variety of ways where he can get out of trouble. Like he has one power that he could disappear, but it turns out that didn't really help him
Mm.
in the fight. So, you know, you know what, what's also a bigger function in this is media, right? So the guy becomes popular. He's people's got their camera phones when he's out, and so that kind of fame and mania introduced themselves as well. Like, is that going to have an effect on the decisions he makes? Is that going to have an effect on how people view him? It's like Spider-Man, where Jonah made him a villain almost from the get. But now this guy comes out and he's almost a celebrity. Well, we know what happens to celebrities. We
Mm.
build them for the fall. So when does that happen? Stay tuned.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so just my last question for you. We covered a lot of different topics on this. Of course, I always know that you had a direction as far as who you want as your core audience to be. Sometimes it surprises you, which who you think is your core audience doesn't end up being that once the IP gets out there. But initially, when you created this, who did you have in mind for consuming this project as far as the majority of the audience?
Well, see, that. So when you're selling things, right, you come up with your phantom buyer, right? But something like this is for Game of Thrones fans. It's for comic book fans. It's for young readers. Uh, let's say 15 to 50. But yeah, it's not particularly designed to say, okay, I want black people from 24 to 30. We want it to be a universal experience, although there are some themes there that may be familiar to certain aspects of humanity, right? Is it for black people? Well, yeah, because everybody in the book is black. But the experience of reading this thing is universal. And that's why we wanted to drop a novel first rather than a graphic novel,
Mm.
because we want people to immerse themselves in the characters. If you look at the book, the pictures are in the back. So you got to get through the book before you really know what these people look like. Because we want it to be an experience that you can read it and see yourself in it. Okay, these guys happen to be black. But, I think that in media and in the telling of black stories, there's a propensity to say, like Spike Lee used to say, it's a black thing you wouldn't understand. Well, I don't agree with that, because when people ask black people what they want, well, what do you want for your kids? You want success for them. You want a home for them. You want family for them. You want the same things you want. So it shouldn't really be a difference to whether a hero is black or white or green or whatever it is, because the themes of humanity are central. And when you try to make something veer towards something else, is it so are you trying to make it special, or are you trying to make it insular? And we want our stories to be universal. We want certain populations to get it. It's not a blatant crossover attempt. We know who we want to read it, but we want everybody to understand that these are human things. These are themes that run through whatever culture, whatever race, whatever age. You should be familiar with these themes. As you mentioned before, there are biblical themes in there. There are modern things in there. There are technological themes in there. So there's nothing in this book that should turn you away from the narrative. There's nothing in this book that make you be, this is,
Right.
it's naturally for people who want adventure, people who want excitement, and people who are interested in coming of age stories. If you want I guess, the dummy buyer, we said, you know, and this girl's in the book. So, and they're setting up their own adventure. So it's not even like, males 18 to 64. It's
Mm.
people. because what we do for his sisters is going to also be fairly revolutionary in terms of how they're brought up and how their adventures, this is not going to be romance stuff and it's not going to be Tomb Raider stuff. It's going to be human stuff. And it's not going to be pandering to women or black women or anything like that. They're going to be genuine adventurers and they'll have their own tales to tell. So I know that's kind of a tap dancing way to get around the question, but really and truly, we just wanted to make the story universal.
All right. Well, I think you did a wonderful job with that, Odell. I thank you for your time. The Plague of Placidius. It is actually available now at bookbaby.com. You can get online copy or you can get a paperback. I also believe the paperback is going to be available soon on Amazon, but you can also get an online
Amazon,
copy as well.
Target, um, everywhere you could buy digital books or physical books, you can get it. Barnes and Noble is there. So Apple, it's also on Apple. So uh, wherever you consume your media, whether you want one in your hand or you want one digitally, you can find it there. Prince Ato, the Porcupine Man, in The Plague of Placidius, Beatboxing and Mayhem. I appreciate you.
Appreciate you. Thank you very much, man.